Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lauren Nanish from SCSP. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our next panel of speakers who are all pioneers and champions of innovation. Dr. Stefanie Tompkins, the director of DARPA. Dr. Tompkins started her career as a United States Army intelligence officer and has led scientists and engineers in interdisciplinary programs across the country. Doug Beck, the director of the Defense Innovation Unit and former vice president at Apple. Dr. Will Roper, the current CEO of Istari and former assistant secretary of the Air Force and Space Force for acquisition. And finally, Shah, managing partner at Shield Capital and former managing partner of the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Unit. We're thrilled that this panel will be moderated by Sally Donnelly, a founding partner at Palace Advisors. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage and enjoy this conversation about innovation in defense research and acquisition. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not great on the mic. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. I was thinking, looking around the room, you rarely get so much hugging at a national security event. And that's, I think, because we're all motivated to be here by the example of Ash and the fun and the pressure we had working with him. I remember the first time he came to my consulting firm when he came out as Deputy Secretary of Defense. So we went to New York on a trip, and I hadn't actually worked with Ash. I didn't really know him that well. And we're down the platform in Penn Station, and the train pulls in. And I turn one way, and I see Ash literally running the other way, like away from me. And I thought, oh my God, I've lost the Deputy Secretary of Defense. But what he was doing, this was before they assigned seats on the train. And he was going to get a seat on our train. And every time I get on the Acela now and I sit in an assigned seat, I say, thank you, Ash. But seriously, he was somebody who didn't settle. He didn't take the first answer. He pressed the system. And I hope all of us are here today to do that in his honor, and also to honor Stefanie, who he wouldn't have been the man and the Secretary of Defense and the friend and the leader he was without Stefanie's support. So thank you, Stefanie, for everything you've done as well. So distinguished panel here today. I'm sure you all have read the biographies, so I won't go over that again. And I think the one thing, as I was thinking about Ash and his legacy, this isn't just going to be a complaining session. This is going to be observations of problems, experiences, and then a way forward. You know, solve the problem. That was Ash's view, it seemed to me. So, Dr. Tompkins, if I could start with you. You work at perhaps the best brand in national security. You've been a leader throughout your career. I wondered if you could just talk us a little through what you're doing at DARPA, the challenges you see, the technologies you think will be the hottest coming forward.
Sure. Can I start with an Ash story, though?
Sure.
Because I think it sort of informs the way I answer the question. So I first met Ash Carter when he was SecDef, and he came to visit DARPA in my previous career there. And I was introduced by my boss to him as someone who had stated that he was completely wrong in certain physics statements he had made. And I got to defend those arguments immediately in real time. He was just so extraordinary in listening, probing, asking questions, and actually being willing to change his mind. And I've used that as a kind of a role model in everything that I do. And I will say that because there's a very good chance that anything I tell you today about what we are doing that will have the most impact in the future is quite possibly going to be wrong. So take that as the foundation. And then I'll say that we're just so privileged at DARPA because we are in an organization that has been given a significant amount of autonomy, and everything that we do in the organization, and we've been given permission by the government to do this, is structured to go against human nature, right? Human nature moves you towards safe places. It moves you towards being comfortable. And we design our entire organization around forcing people not to get too comfortable and to always be pushing to the very edge of what we think is possible. which means we get rid of people as soon as they have been there too long. We're constantly driving for making lots and lots of bets, but then forcing ourselves to ask hard questions about what is not good enough and what we should kill off so that we can make a bigger difference somewhere else. So within that context, we start 40 or 50 new programs a year. It's all started by amazing people from around the country, coming from all different walks of life. Within that, there are lots of really cool things that are sort of bubbling up. Of course, lots of people are familiar with the more traditional spaces that we might work in, which would be, sort of the creation of the ARPANET, or investments in mRNA vaccines, or Javelin missiles, or things like that. I'll just hit a couple that might be a little less traditional. One is the area of supply chains. We have gone all in. My program managers have recognized this for a number of years and started probably 7 or 8 years ago, pushing on the idea of being able to make what you need where you need it. Whether it is medicine, whether it is oils and lubricants and food and water and all of those things, they're trying to break all of the canonical assumptions about logistics and what you have to live with, and we're trying to change those rules. Another quick topic is one having to do with software security, and everybody here, I'm sure, is familiar with having 75 different passwords and having to change them every 3 months and never being able to remember, and you're not supposed to write them down, but of course you write them down. And the fact that, and I think in the last panel we heard about the constant reaction to attacks. So imagine a world in which you just didn't have to do that. Imagine a world in which your software was inherently secure by design, and it was backed up by hardware that was inherently secure, and they were working in concert to make it so that that was not a thing you had to worry about ever again. So multiple programs in that space. Happy to talk more about anything, but I think that's a good place to stop.
That lays it out well. Thanks. I'm going to jump over you, Raj, not as a sign of disrespect, but speed. Will, you spent considerable time at senior levels at the department and trying to make things go faster and getting new capabilities into the hands of the warfighter. Now you're on the outside doing similar things. Could you give us an assessment now that you've been out for a little bit? How is the system working? Are we doing well enough? It's a bit of a softball, but I think I know where you're going on the answer.
I guess we're all going to start with our Ashism, and mine was always knowing when he would take walks around the Pentagon, so that if I was stuck in the bureaucracy, I could take a strategically timed walk and get unstuck. And that partly answers your question, is that, we're a bureaucracy, and it's really, we throw stones at that word, we rail against it, but we understand that's what it is. We divide up the powers within our organizations. That's the way our government's structured, so that you can't do volatile, crazy things unless need arises and you get consensus of will. And when you get consensus of will, you can do things quickly. And I think the challenge we have now is through Ash's leadership, we really have kindled a spirit of innovation in government. And it's not BS, it is legitimate. People want to innovate, solve problems differently, work with new technology. And what I've seen since now serving on the Defense Innovation Board, which Ash also started, is we've interviewed people that has been reciprocated inside of government and industry with investors. Everyone believes that the will is there. But what the process is not organized to do is to bring it in at scale, to mechanize it. It's mechanized to go to war the way that we did in past decades, but it's really not mechanized for innovation. And I think the big litmus test, and really the needed step to culminate Ash's vision of bringing innovation back to defense, is whether or not we start treating defending this innovation battlefield as a true mission in the department. If we do, we'll organize, staff, equip, and resource for it. And our military is amazing, right? It can fly airplanes anywhere in the world, sail ships any place it needs to go, erect cities in the desert if it needs to, and watch all of it from space overhead. It's an amazing organization. And it's worth remembering that from time to time. It does the impossible, and our nation often asks that. But what we really haven't had come across all facets of government is the demand that innovation and defending the innovation battlefield that is the US tech ecosystem, that's a core mission. And if it decides it is, then it'll do it. And if it doesn't, then it won't. And the thing I'm hoping is that events like this will encourage us to do everything in our power to make that a core mission, so that the wheels of government that allow scale to happen through consensus building, the slow process of it, will be put in place. But I think that there was a great kickstart, great feedback from companies, thanks to people like Raj, who brought a lot of great companies into the department. Doug's taking the baton at a time where DIU's, stepping up in importance in the organization. Stefanie's running one of the most storied innovation organizations in government, all of government, right? There's a great kickstart to this, but now scale is the remaining question. And I don't know where to vote on it. I really don't. Ash was such a powerful mover behind the scenes. And in his absence, we're all going to have to take a little piece of his gravity and combine it, right? Build that consensus to move this over the goal line. And that's a fight worth fighting. And that's a legacy that I think would be fitting to Ash.
That's a nice segue to you, Raj. You were head of the Defense Innovation Unit when the first reboot under Ash. Talk to us about how you came into that organization, what you did to, I don't want to call revive it, but certainly make it a very effective tool.
Sure, thank you. And I too will start with my favorite story about Dr. Carter. And so like Will, I knew that if you needed a meeting with the secretary, you'd wander around the E-ring and he'd bump into you. And so he'd come up to you, give you a big bear hug. And then he'd say, Raj, so great to see you. What are you doing here? I'm paying you to be in Silicon Valley to find companies. And we'd be like, sir, our problems are actually all here and our battles are here in this building. And then he would turn to the two Erics, Eric Rosenbach and General Smith, and say, hey, go fix these problems. And no kidding, they would. So he had this ability to see a problem and then go and solve it. So I was brought in sort of unexpectedly to the department to help reboot and stand up DIU. And I think what's interesting, particularly around Dr. Carter's vision for this, is that he was so forward in thinking about it, right? He wrote a paper in 2001 at Harvard with Marcel Lettre about how commercial innovation was going to be decisive on the battlefield. And then he put this organization together, 15 years later when he was in charge. And if I think about DIU as a startup, he was its founder. He was the chairman of the board. We had other board members like the innovation board and Eric Smith. And I was the first sort of CEO to brought in to grow it. And we had seed funding that we were able to get from the couch cushions. But now it's scaled and it's grown. I would say, from venture speak, it's a unicorn now in the building, but still has a long way to go and an opportunity. And so I'm very excited that Doug again is taking the helm, and it's going to be elevated back to the secretary. And I think the focus that we had, and I think Doug will continue, is two things: speed and, as Will said, scale. So on speed, technology is changing so fast. And so my belief is the winner is going to be the military, the entity that can identify, ingest, and operationalize that technology the fastest. And then, of course, scale it to a level that matters.
So before I get to Doug down there, can I just follow up?
Please.
So as you look at the system now, speed in many cases doesn't seem to be a broad characteristic of the system, right? So what would you do differently?
Well, the DoD is a big place, right? 3 million people, hundreds of organizations. So I'd almost take a little bit of a venture mindset, which is, feed the winners. So there's lots of different organizations that are doing great work. And the ones that are finding how to move quickly, let's give them additional resources, additional capital, additional people, and have them scale those processes across the department. I was told earlier, it was said earlier here on stage that, the DoD doesn't have an innovation problem, but an innovation adoption problem. And I think let's find the adopters and scale them.
And my last question on this topic, do you think there are members of Congress who would be supportive of that sort of change?
Absolutely. I think we're seeing that, and hopefully we'll see that in the coming budgets.
Great. Doug, I'd like to turn to you. I know you're far away from me, but Naval Reservist, you were very involved at DIU in that capacity. I know you've spent a lot of time in your commercial sector life at Apple, working in the Indo-Pacific. So just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what you see coming out of those experiences in the combined experience. And I think the one I think everyone appreciates that you've actually taken this role on. So thank you for doing that. And I do applaud Secretary Austin for not only bringing you on, but recognizing the importance of the role and what it needs to do, and bringing that back to report to him. So I think with that combination of your background and his personal interest, I believe, I think you can do even greater things than you've done. So can you talk a little bit about your journey?
Sure. Well, maybe before I do that, I'll also maybe do my short moment about Ash Carter. Like so many in this room, my life has been profoundly shaped by my interaction with Ash Carter. In fact, I would literally not be sitting here right now in so many different ways. First, because the organization I'm now stepping into to shoes the people who've gone before to help lead wouldn't exist, but also because the last few conversations that I had with him were all about him convincing me that it was time to upset my apple cart, so to speak, and come join the department full time. And I remember the last conversation I had was, he said, Doug, there's one word, and the word is duty. And that's a word that it struck home for me, but it's also a word that I know shaped so much of his life. And so I can't think of a better tribute than sitting here with all of you and Stefanie with you to his legacy. And even more tribute to him is what we're all going to do as we work together to go carry this forward. So I'm just honored to be in the room with everyone. Maybe Sally, to kind of to get your question about DIU and kind of where we maybe need to head. The first one is, it's super heartening. If we just think about like where we've come, super heartening as we sit in this room and think about all of the senior leaders, current and past and future, who are sitting in the room talking about the imperative and how the imperative that faces us with pacing threat in China, among others, how we must solve this issue in order to meet that threat. And that's actually a very, when Ash Carter first started saying that, not everybody was saying that, right? So that's, we're way past that, and we're seeing very clearly right now in Ukraine just how much the speed and use of commercial technology can affect things on the battlefield. So if we put kind of DIU against that, the way I kind of see it is, the first iteration of DIU and the first for DIUX at the time, the first thing that we were working on in those early days was literally just building a bridge at all. And this was like, Silicon Valley, this is the Defense Department, this is Silicon Valley. You ought to know each other. There might be some things you could do together. It's actually really important that you do. By the way, when you go to each other's house, you might want to dress differently. That was literally what we were doing. And check, that's been done and done incredibly well, and a ton of times over in this room is a reflection of that. Although we're all kind of dressed like this, except Chris Lynch, who I saw. Who's the second step then was to prove that you could take a real military problem and an actual commercial technology and bring them together and find a solution, and then use OTAs or whatever other methodology to rapidly prototype that and bring it to a place that it could be fieldable and scalable in some real way. And that's been done. It's done 65, 70 times at DIU already. It's something that Other innovation organizations that have sprung up all around following those models have kind of also done, and that's great. And so now the next step is to take that capability and apply it to our most strategic problems. And that is what the channel is, and it challenges now, and it's all about speed and scale, and it's about picking the right things and doing the work with the rest of the department to pick the right things to make sure that we're selecting those and then doing the work together again to ensure that those things can scale.
So I'll probably ask anyone on the panel, but I'll start, Will, with you if I could. It takes two to tango, and DIU has been crucial in the dance step choreography, right? But one, do you find non-traditional companies increasingly or decreasingly willing to work with the department? And part of the challenge, I think, the problem actually has been the disconnect, right? I think many private sector commercial, particularly non-traditionals, think they have the answer, but the department actually hasn't given them what they're looking for, or doesn't have a way, a system, a channel to communicate very well. What's your view of that?
Oh, Sally, where are we going to start on this? One thing I'm really thankful we got the opportunity to look at this on the Defense Innovation Board. And I'm not here speaking for the board, but it's a problem that really does deserve a lot of time and attention, because you can't just go take a little plot and plant a flower and pretend that you've somehow moved the ball towards creating a garden. You really have to do it all at once, right? Think about everything involved in the ecosystem, and our ecosystem makes it hard for startups. It's a lot of different reasons, right? You've got the R&D cycle that's being funded on a yearly basis, and the procurement and service budget that's being funded on like a 2 to 3 year basis, and they're just mismatched temporally. So you can be rocking it under your R&D contract, successfully finish your prototype, and then the government's going to tell you, you did a great job, and in 2 years, you're going to be in the budget. So there's a mismatch in timing. There's a mismatch in product market fit, because a lot of times the R&D organizations don't speak for the fielding organizations. They don't speak for the users. And for anyone in here that's built a budget, has anyone been part of, in government, the POM process in a service? Has anyone been part of industry hoping your program made it into the POM process? Did you ever feel comfortable? I was the acquisition exec of the Air Force, and I didn't feel comfortable about our programs ever, right? And I was inside the government. So the idea that there's the same product market fit is just not true. Now, there are things that we can do to make it a better indicator when you're on a government contract of a certain type, of a certain level. But today it's really hard to know, are you moving towards the budget, or are you on a cul-de-sac that eventually is going to dead end and you go back the other way? And so I think that this is the process of scale, right? It sucks in government having to tame this big bureaucracy to ultimately deliver things, but it does do it painfully, the hard way often. But there's no reason it can't do it for startups. What I'm convinced of, it won't do it until it truly cares about it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure it cares about it. I don't believe it yet. I think it cares to care about it, but to care, you got to put your people and you have to put your resources, where your mouth is. Mm-hmm. And secondly, there's just not a lot of places to put startups in the big defense budget. And that was a big aha for me, how quickly it locks down. It locks down in the big programs and the huge sustainment tail. So it's crazy when you're joined like the Air Force out of a prototyping organization like I ran in SCO, and I was trying to get services to take prototypes and make big programs of record, and the team did a great job. They're like 3/4 of the programs transition. And then I moved to a service and I realized what I was asking a service to do was like a miracle. To get some big billion-dollar thing wedged in the budget with the out-year funding, the personnel, all the training and equipping things that have to be done, the engaging with Congress, it's just too slow and generational where you can put big new things in. But that's not a good it's not a good paradigm for many commercial industries that are changing and refreshing really quickly, where manufacturing is turning over quickly. So the overhaul that's needed to truly make two tango is a big one, Sally. And I think when I say people have to care about it, it's not going to be something where you can just go make a couple little twists of knobs and, okay, now the system's tuned to work. It's going to take an overhaul and a reform. And, you know, I'm hoping that with support of a lot of people in this room, it can be done. I mean, I think that's what Ash would tell us is the next step. We've proved that we can bring people in. We've gotten our bigger Pentagonian apparatus to be able to speak the right language, kinda, use the right contracts, kinda, and understand that these companies need to be treated differently. Now we got to turn the process around it so that it can bring them to the battlefield at scale. And if it does, you know, American innovation is a great advantage. And there are a lot of technologies that are not going to take people off the battlefield. They're going to put amazing new capabilities in their hands. And we're living that with large language models now. So it's an exciting time if we can get all of this innovation through our sclerotic system to the hands of operators, but pushing a rope right now, and that's not going to work.
Dr. Tompkins, do you have?
Sure. I mean, I'll say, so I completely agree with Will. I think that one of the challenges when you're talking about scale is that so often these big changes are just too abstract, right? And so people get a little overwhelmed with the immensity of what they have to do. So one of the things that we have been essentially doing is piloting new business processes. A lot of them, you know, so things that will allow companies that have never worked with the government very rapid access to a classified problem space so that they can actually understand whether or not they do have a solution that is useful. Things that allow startups that we have funded to get the mentoring they need to develop a commercial business model, which then sustains them to the point that they can actually navigate the DoD system. Like, there's a whole bunch of those things. And, you know, so one, the more you do experiments and gather data, the more you're able to provide the engines of change examples of how they can actually build something and actually scale it and do the numbers and see what works. But two, it's also, I think, a really useful point to remember that what you really want to do is create an organization that is not just DARPA being flexible enough to try new things, but like the entire department as well, right? So we represent small organizations, each of whom, and sometimes we trade off of each other really well and create our own little ecosystem. Mm-hmm. But the freedom and flexibility that each of us has been given in our government roles is something that is really unusual. So, you know, take the lessons the experiments we are learning from and scale them up. And then from that, also figure out how you scale the experimental mindset so that it's not just an overhaul one time, which then has to be done again 10 years from now or 20 years from now, but there is a way of continuous change that is built into how everyone does things. So
makes sense, Raj.
Yeah, Sally, I'd have just a simple recommendation for the department around this problem. Just buy what you say you want. Right? Every senior leader will talk about AI and ML and how important it is on the battlefield. And I did a little analysis. I think if you look at last year's Pentagon budget, maybe $1.5 to $2 billion went to real advanced AI technologies. You know, if we're spending less than 1% of our budget on what we say is the most important thing, right? That doesn't seem to compute. And there are organizations that know how to do this hard contracting work. DARPA knows how to do it. SCO's done it. Yeah, used to. So we have places to go after do it. We just have to make those hard trade-offs. And that's just not the department. That's Congress as well. Maybe the one thing I'll add, Sally, is like a little view of what's happening in the Valley. I've never seen so much interest from engineers and technologists to work on defense problems, right? They're tired of doing photo sharing apps. They want to have meaning in life, particularly post-COVID, where many of them have been stuck in Zoom rooms for years. Like, there's a real desire. And I think our enduring asymmetric advantage over places like China is the creativity of our startups, right? It's the talent and their willingness to take risk. It's the private investment capital that's ready to fund them, and generally our capitalist free market system to build these things. And so I think we need to double down on that, and the DoD and Congress has an enormous opportunity to push that forward.
One, do you think that's happening? Number one. Number two, what's the timeline on that? What's the patience level?
So there's an incredible number of companies, and there's an incredible number of private capital going on it. We're starting to see some movement in the department, but it's not near as fast. What's the timeline? It's hard to say, but startups and young companies like Will started, they think in 18 months increments, and if you don't see anything in 18 months, you'll move away from that. So we have a limited time.
Right. Doug, can I just throw you a fastball a little bit? Because you spent so much of your time in Asia, can you talk a little bit about, and I know you don't do that full time now, right? And you're shifting to DIU, but Partners and Allies is a big part of the national defense strategy and going forward. Do you see any places for particular cooperation in Asia with the United States? Obviously, AUKUS is part of that, but what's your assessment of potential for collaboration?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that we cannot get after this problem unless we get after it effectively, working with our allies and partners. In the same way that the company that I worked for until recently, you pick that thing up, right? Everything, there's American parts inside there, Japanese parts inside there, Korean parts inside there, and all those pieces come together with the most forward-leaning pieces of the sharpest technology are coming from a whole lot of different places, and most of those places are our good friends. And so point number one is, for us to be really at the cutting edge, we've got to be leveraging the very, very best of what we do here in the United States, the very, very best of what our friends do, what we can learn from them, and what they can learn from us. And one of the things that we'll be working on is how better to do that. So the answer is absolutely, and we need to.
Great. And to put you a little bit even more on the spot, since you haven't, I think you're in your second week or first week at DIU.
My swearing in was yesterday at 4 p.m., so I'm not even on the second bounce off the turnip truck yet. But
and
thanks.
just for the crowd, have you gotten all your access programs and you have a card to access the Pentagon? Is that correct?
I'm able to walk around the building.
Escorted, I'm sure. No, but as you thought about the problem, and I'm sure your conversations with the Secretary and the DepSecDef, you probably have some general themes that you're going to pursue. Can you talk about those at all?
So as I said, I'm not even on the second bounce off the turnip truck. So and what I'm starting with is a lot of listening, because the challenges that Will referred to are real, and I'm actually very, very heartened by the number of people who I think do care about the problem, and which is one step beyond caring about the problem. And I can think, Will, about a lot of the times when we were talking about these things, and you were in the government and I was in the private sector. Those challenges are there, but I do think there's a lot of energy around it. So the first step is just a lot of listening. Maybe I'd sort of throw out two things that I think we can do that are all about essentially doing what Raj was laying out, about being clear about where the demand signal is. In order to be in a place that we can take applying the capability that organizations like DIU and others have built to our most strategic challenges, we need to do a better job of working across the department to be very clear about which of those many things we might be able to prototype are the ones that are really going to make a difference, right? And just helping to communicate that so that people in the private sector in the world that I just came from understand what that is will help. People to know where to take risk, to know where to make investments, to know where to push. And at the same time, doing the work across that whole broad team in the department to be able to be clear about where it is that we will be in a position to scale, because those are the things that matter. I think, again, that makes it easier for all those people who know how to take risks. There's no shortage of energy. There's no shortage of people who want to work on this, and there's no shortage of money. We just need to make it clearer where that demand signal is, and then increase the confidence. And I don't want to make this sound simple, because I know it's not, but increase the confidence that we'll be there as the counterparty when it's time to scale.
Dr. Tompkins, can I bring this to you for a moment? So part of that is being clear, sending right signals, picking winners. I've heard all this. But there's also the other side, which is telling people when they've lost, right? When their product isn't what they claim it is, right? What they advertise it to be. How is that process for DARPA? That the clarity actually, I think many companies and leaders actually respect and want. But how is that for you all? And do you find you have to deal with disgruntled companies or leaders, or do they go away and try again?
Well, it's going to depend, right? Hundreds of programs, thousands of companies, universities, nonprofits that are actually working on DARPA programs, you're going to have a variety of different results. And we're actually in the middle of experimenting right now. So people who know DARPA know that we have been known for quite a while with sort of a go, no-go model, where we put in very, very hard phase boundaries. And if you didn't make it, the program's dead. People who know DARPA really well know that those were actually fuzzier boundaries than they might have sounded like, and there was actually a lot of conversation. So the decisions weren't quite as arbitrary as they sounded. But nonetheless, I mentioned at the beginning that we try to structure ourselves to sort of go against human nature. One of the things we are experimenting with is maybe going with human nature. There is something deep in all of us that hates to lose, right? We hate to kill something off. Our program managers like the people they are working with, and even if it's not working, they kind of want to keep going. So we're trying to make some fundamental changes in our internal business model where we're doing a lot more small bets and throwing gasoline on the ones that are doing really well and growing them very quickly, rather than making large things that you then have to kill, right? And so there's a really simple flip there. We will never have a situation where every program in DARPA looks the same, but we're going to do a lot more of those and see whether or not that allows us to move even more quickly and kind of go against that hard thing of knowing how to stop. Yeah.
It sounds very interesting to me, but I'd like to hear what Raj says about lots of small bets. Does that make sense?
You start with small bets,
Yeah.
But then you have to bet on your winners. You have to get to scale. Again, when we think about DoD scale, it's the largest organization in the world, and so I view the small bet as ways to lower risk. You always hear about de-risking in large programs, and we're afraid to take risk. I think putting all your bets in just one place to start with is the most risky thing you can do, especially when you think about software or technology that's changing so fast. So make a bunch of small bets, have milestones, and ultimately you get the best answer.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Maybe just to build on that, when we're talking about focusing on the things that are going to make a difference, that's not necessarily about picking winners. It's about picking problems that we need to solve. And having the confidence that those are the problems that need solving, and these are the kinds of technologies that we need to solve. And then there may be multiple small bets that go against trying to solve that, and they move through a very natural process. And the system in our country is very good at helping figure out how those things are, which ones are going to make a difference, and then go from there.
Will, anything to add to that?
I think the most constraining thing is really working backwards from where will this innovation live with recurring revenue in the budget. And so I think rather than scaling up, we will really have to work back, systematically freeing opportunities in the budget where new programs can be created, and programs that have different rules than the historical generational programs where most of the opportunity is in sustainment. Right, there's opportunity to use modern manufacturing, modern design that can keep improving technology. But if we're doing really, really well on the R&D side, and we're placing a lot of really good small bets well, and we're building up to winners, placing more strategically increasing bets, but then we're still primarily doing platform programs that are generational in nature, there's no place to put these. And it's those platform programs that are generational in nature that most of the politics of this town go. I don't think I ever got a phone call with someone really upset about a small R&D program. But if something went wrong in a platform program that involved jobs in someone's location, right, or assets that were going to be on their bases, it went political really quickly. And that's just part of the system. We're a representative government, and this is how it works. And so if we're going to change the direction of the boat, it's going to have to be done slowly, working with Congress, program by program, freeing up space for innovation to have a home. And then we work backwards to all the good practices that Stefanie and Raj and name just went out of my head. Right?
Hi, Doug.
Doug. Doug. I've known you for years, right?
20.
You get passionate, you forget things. And I think then we would know there's a target and we would know a sense of the scope for it. But if you want to know, if you ask me to say what's the most likely thing to happen, is that we'll keep getting better and better at being investors and bet betters in the department, but just not have any place to have those winners have a home.
And that wouldn't be in the services? It
has to be. It has to be. They ultimately train, staff, and equip. And so the thing that really worked well for me when I was running SCO for ASH, and nearly everything we did was classified, which helps. But the services were your customers, right? They ultimately had to take the system and go field it. And I found that made me care about things that I probably wouldn't have as an R&D organization. You started caring about training, were we doing the panels the same way that people were trained today or not? Were we doing the maintenance? Would the maintenance routine be the same? And just to be frank, sometimes we just had to float a program for a year because it wasn't well timed to go into the Navy's budget, because they were dealing with the big political system of getting a new start into their budget. And as I mentioned earlier, our R&D system doesn't have the ability to float something a year, because by the time it's the next year of execution, that money's gone to something else. So we really are missing something between the world of R&D and the world of the big procurement and service budget. There needs to be something in between. I think many people have thought about this, talked about this, but I'm convinced it's needed, where we've decided something is a real product, we want it to go into the budget, but we're not timed yet for the trained staffing and equipping. There ought to be a lot of rules on it, but I do think something will be needed to solve the temporal mismatch in the budget.
Dr. Tompkins?
Yeah, well, I'm going to, I agree with almost everything you said. I think I'm just going to throw one thing on top of that, which is that so much of the technology that we're developing right now is joint, and it is about joint warfighting and joint operations. I am not convinced that the model that it has to be done service by service is working. And so I think we have to go even a level higher and figure out how you do those things where everybody calls this new technology their second priority, but it's never anyone's number one. And we have got to figure out how to sort of break those assumptions and those barriers, because otherwise it's really hard to get out of our own way in how we are actually going to be able to protect our nation.
I think that I agree with your point, Stefanie. I think there are more and more things are going to be probably like executive agencies in the department, where it needs to be shared by everyone, but someone's got to go buy it and field it at scale to the requirements. And that's what the services are there to do. And so I think ultimately, it's going to require them for scale, and then really good feeding from the kind of R&D betting, and those organizations are in the services as well. And then I think there are going to be some just good contracting reforms that are going to be needed. I think there are things we can do above and beyond what we've done today. And I think the biggest impediment on the whole is the budget. And I found that was the biggest issue for me trying to get innovation done was the budget.
Well, when you say the budget, you mean the color of money, the
color of money, because you did great R&D, but if it's not a finished product that can go into procurement or a service contract, it's got to go back into R&D. That money's been spent. Yeah. It's the reprogramming across PEs, huge detriment, right? People used to say, you manage $60 billion in Air Force programs. And I would say, no, I don't. I manage 538 small programs for the Air Force that add up to $600 billion. But I do not have 60 billion in purchasing power, because I can't move it to solve Air Force problems. So that is a big issue. And just the cycle by which we decide to buy something. Like Raj is mentioning, buy what we say. The person that said it is probably not in that position anymore by the time it's time to buy it with our current process today.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because I think Raj is on a congressionally mandated commission to fix the problem. Raj.
Yeah, I got an equal measure of condolences and congratulations. Look, I think it really, the department has tried really hard to do its best, right? And Dr. Carter and his legacy has continued, but ultimately this does come down to, I think, the Congress and the ability to fix the myriad of budgeting problems, right? And I think, so, what's different than before? And it's, to me, it's twofold. It's how do you rebuild trust, right, between these two branches of government? So do we trust our leaders and our program executive officers to apportion their budget they want, right? Do they have to, at what level do they need to go back for a, and not to get too arcane, below threshold reprogramming to move money around? And so I think there's a whole set of reforms around trust between our organizations or branches of government. And then the other one is, how do you think about oversight and the budgeting process when the type of technologies you want to buy are changing so quickly, right? Yeah. The system actually works quite well for a long duration asset like a aircraft carrier. It works pretty well. But if by the time you write your set of requirements, the technology has already shifted, and as we heard earlier, large language models, now we're talking weeks and months, not even years, the system just can't keep up. So I'm optimistic that both sides of government understand this problem and have a commitment to make some real reform.
Okay, well, that's good to be optimistic. You might be alone here in this crowded room, but
Sally, it boils down to this, right? And the system swings between it. It swings between phases where it tries to trust people by delegation and go make the right choices, and then it swings back to process when the first examples of people making mistakes come in.
Fair.
And ultimately, if we're going to compete against China long term, we have to choose between one of those two things.
Fair.
And Dr. Carter would tell us, hands down, go with people. That's our advantage.
Fair. Doug, did you have something to add? Or no?
So I was actually going to say maybe two things quickly. The first one is to this conversation that Stefanie and Frank, Fred, Harry, Will
Any four-letter word is fine.
we're having about the need to be joint, the need for service. I think the answer is both. First of all, and I think part of the answer is, in order to be getting after those solutions that are truly strategic, that are going to meaningfully change the game, which by that I mean it's either going to help us to deter major conflict or help us win if we're forced to fight. In order to do that, a lot of those solutions are going to have to be joint, and they're going to have to come from a demand signal that is, for example, out in INDOPACOM, and they're going to have to work through the services in order to actually scale. So the answer is both those things. And then the only other thing that I would say is, you've heard this a lot across kind of all the panel, especially those who aren't on their second bounce off the turnip truck, just how challenging this is. But I'd kind of bring us back to where all of us on this panel started, which was with Ash Carter. If there's one thing that he taught me, I think taught all of us, it's number one, you can't shy away from the hard problems. Number two, that we have to solve this problem if we as a nation are going to be able to live in the world that we want to live in. And number three, that the way that we're going to solve it is by being willing to fight through barriers together. And so, for me, that's kind of the last word in terms of what I think he's inspired at least me to want to come and join this in a full-time way to go do, and why I'm so excited to be doing it with all those who are doing it with me.
I did want to ask you about your decision to come to full service to DIU. We know you've been a naval reservist for a number of years, but
26.
As you thought through it, I mean, the company where you worked, Apple, it's very, very successful. It's very challenging. It's cutting edge. So what made you decide to take the role at DIU?
It's actually it's the word that Ash used with me. It's duty.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty simple. If there is even a 1% chance that you can make a 1% difference to the problems that we're talking about and reduce the chances that we end up in a war that we don't want to be in, or we end up losing one even worse, how do you not go do that? So of course, that's why I'm here.
Excellent. Well, thanks. Thanks for coming. Dr. Tompkins, I think we probably should wrap up and let people get up and stretch their legs, seventh inning stretch. Can I just finish with you, and could you talk a little bit about your organization as a sort of leader for all of us and an icon, where you're going to take it, and what challenges can this group help you with going forward?
So, I mean, you've heard I think you've heard all the challenges, right? We are very much a part of an ecosystem. We just have the luxury that we are sort of given the mission of being the disruptors within the ecosystem. That's fun, and it's often easier, and the problems that we have to solve are simpler than the ones that a lot of my colleagues in the Pentagon actually have to do. But to all of you, if you have ideas, experiments, things that we should try, business barriers, not just technology barriers, you let us know, right? We're listening. We have the luxury of trying something very quickly, assessing whether or not it works or not, and then either going all in or cutting it off. We talked about, that sort of a model. But our job is to listen, and our job is to experiment, and we're here.
You're open for business.
Indeed.
Excellent. If there are any last thoughts, Raj?
Well, I mean, the only other thing I would end on, why be optimistic? I think it's this. I can't let you end us on that, right? Like, look at this crowd, right? Look who has come here from government, from industry, from private capital. I think the legacy that Dr. Carter has given us of this improvement in bringing innovation, is for us to carry on. And this is what gives me optimism: is how much energy is in the room today.
2012 was the first time I got pulled into Dr. Carter's office and told, go do something about China in a department that was fighting terrorists in the Middle East. So 11 years later, what an amazing pivot has happened. But I think it's important to end in the 19 seconds that we have that although Dr. Carter is synonymous with innovation, and innovation is how we win, that what ultimately got us started on this was that we have a strategic competitor again. And the way that we compete and win against a competitor like China is on the innovation battlefield. So we've got to be just as good at this as we are at war fighting.
Excellent. Thanks for an excellent panel.